The Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. Chapter 7. Unlasting Revenge Complete. Now, work hard. The merchant Rudy considered himself to be blessed. As the third-born son of Viscount Maggio's noble merchant family, he couldn't inherit the household, but he had been raised without suffering discrimination at the hands of his parents and his two older brothers. He had received the same high-level education as the first and second sons, and had been prepared to become independent from an early age, as he could not inherit the household. And so, once he became an adult, Rudy began to gather experience as a merchant. He had received a one-off support fund from his family to become independent and had experienced various hardships to get where he was today. This was now his third year as a merchant. His business had succeeded to a point where he was deciding whether he should use the money he had saved to buy a carriage and invite other merchants to form a caravan, or settle down somewhere and open up his own store. However, Rudy had been captured several days ago and thought his luck had run out. He had hired E-class adventurers as escorts, but they had been killed by the sheer number of bandit groups within 20 minutes. He regretted not hiring more escorts, but it was too late now. He had his goods and money taken, and when his life was next, the words he had shouted were, "My family will pay a ransom for me." It was the worst way to beg for his life. But dying proudly was not a merchant's job. He would cause trouble for his family, but he had to do whatever he could to survive and rebuild his business. He could pay the ransom his family had paid for him by earning more money through that business. It would be best if a group of adventurers or knights appeared gallantly to exterminate the bandits, rescue him, and return his stolen goods and money. But the world was apparently not such a nice place. As he thought that, a sound reached the ears of Rudy, who had been living a simple lifestyle in a dark, damp dungeon. "Has somebody come underground?" Rudy, becoming aware of the soft sounds of someone coming down the ladder, lifted his body from the crude, slightly smelly blanket to peer through the wooden bars. But it was pitch black and he couldn't see anything. If it were one of the bandits coming down, there should be a candle and signs of living magic. He had thought it was just his imagination, but he could hear the footsteps of someone steadily approaching. Those footsteps stopped in front of his prison. However, in the darkness, he still couldn't see anything. Who is it?" In response to his high-pitched, fearful question, a voice came from towards the ground. "Ah, I apologize. I had not realized it was dark down here. Demon light." Whoosh! A blue, fist-sized flame lit the dungeon. A ghost! Standing in front of Rudy's eyes was a small infant with disheveled white hair and candle wax-like skin, wearing rag-like clothes. Rudy had assumed that this lifeless-looking figure must be an undead child that had been killed by the bandits and come back to haunt this place. He clutched his blanket tightly and began to tremble. "No, I am alive." When Rudy screamed, Vandaloo had wondered, "Can this person see spirits too?" But when Vandaloo realized that it was he himself that had scared Rudy, he lowered his shoulders. He thought that Rudy shouldn't be so afraid of him when he had come here to help him, and suddenly put his own appearance out of his mind. He gathered his thoughts again and continued, "I have taken care of all of the bandits that captured you. As you can see, I'm not an adventurer, but a dhampir." As Vandaloo spoke with a disinterested voice, Rudy began to gradually calm down. But he realized that his position hadn't changed for the better, and his face turned pale. "A dhampir? So does that mean you're going to kill me? Dampiers, in the country that Rudy was born and raised in, they were treated as monsters and targets of extermination. The priests of Alda, in particular, did not hesitate to label them as a special kind of undead. Therefore, it was not just a matter of Vandaloo not feeling any obligation to rescue him like an adventurer or knight would. It was highly likely that he would be silenced now that he had seen the Dampier's face. However, the Dampier child before him shook his head. No, if you are willing to stay quiet about me, I have no intention of killing you. Really? Yes, you were captured once by bandits, but you still succeeded in escaping during the conflict with another bandit group. Please, spread that story. Please do not say a word about me to anyone. Rudy was only half convinced, though it was understandable, as from his point of view it was as if he had met a virtuous devil. Vandaloo himself actually knew that it would be better to silence the merchant, but he had a reason for not killing Rudy if he could help it. I want to make my normal activity as good as possible for the future. That was his simple reason. It was fine to kill bandits for his own protection, as nobody would consider it a crime even if he were to kill every last one in all of Lambda. However, killing a pitiful victim like Rudy for his own protection would be the act of a fiend. Vandaloo thought that this kind of behavior, even if nobody found out about it, would have a terrible influence on his own personality. His uncle's family, who had mistreated him on Earth, the terrorists who had used a bomb to blow up both themselves and the ferry, the researchers in Origin who had performed human experiments on countless humans, including himself, all of these people were simply evil lunatics in Vandaloo's eyes. He could not become an evil lunatic like them. Because he hated them, he felt that he didn't want to be like them. But even more importantly, Vandaloo wished to live the happy life that he had never had a taste of, either on Earth or in Origin. This was to make that wish come true. A prosperous, comfortable lifestyle, and warm relations with the family and friends around him. Could an evil lunatic build and maintain such a lifestyle? And though it was still about half a century away, one day Amemiya Hiroto and the others, with cheat-like abilities, would be reincarnated here. If he turned to evil, it was likely that they would purge him in the name of justice. Because of their cheat-like abilities, Vandaloo had the feeling that even if he left no witnesses, they would somehow dig up and expose the crimes of his past. There would probably be some of them who could read a person's mind or see into the past or otherwise expose his crimes directly, and they would be very skilled with magic. Therefore, Vandaloo wanted to avoid having to kill victims like Rudy. If that's all, then I understand, since I'm not an adventurer or anything. And fortunately, Rudy wasn't a fanatical worshipper of Alda, so he accepted Vandaloo's conditions and chose to live. The other wise decision that Rudy made was to not look down on Vandaloo because of his age. He was fearful and careful of this child whose height did not even reach his own waist. With that said, it was the only natural response for Rudy. Vandaloo's mature tone did not match that of his appearance and the ominous aura he was giving off. It was clear that he was not just an infant. With a clack, the padlock was removed with the key that the bandit leader had been holding. Now that Rudy was free, he gave a sigh of relief, but... if you tell anyone about me, I will send evil spirits after you, so please, do not change your mind. With a pale face and chattering teeth, Rudy nodded in response to the threat that Vandaloo made, just in case. Rudy climbed up the ladder to the surface and shuddered violently as he saw the bandits' corpses on the ground, the blood-covered undead and Bonebird, who was now covered in pale bluish-white light after increasing in rank, letting out ominous cries of joy. And then he swore he would definitely keep this secret, even if he was offered a mountain of platinum coins. Rudy drank the alcohol that the bandits had been drinking to mask his fear as he retrieved his belongings that the bandits had stolen. In addition, he had been told, "I can't use living horses." So he had been given the bandits' horses, and then he tied the wagon taken from the other bandits to the horses and left. He was traveling alone with no escorts, but Vandaloo had exterminated all of the bandits that had made this area their territory. So as long as he wasn't unfortunate enough to encounter a group of goblins, he would be able to reach his destination. He had unexpectedly received horses, so now he would be buying a carriage, forming a caravan of merchants and expanding his business, but this was irrelevant to Vandaloo. Vandaloo spent the remaining time until daybreak replacing the chipped bones of the undead with spare parts, the animal and human bones that he had been collecting up until now. He also played with Bonebird, who had increased in rank and gained the ability to fly with its new spirit wings, and buried the dead bandits. And then he slept soundly until noon. He left Bone Man and the others to see Rudy off. No matter how much of a stranger Rudy was to Vandaloo, he thought that he should at least do that. And then Vandaloo woke up and ate the bandits' leftovers for lunch. On his menu was salted meat, bread, and cheese. There were dried vegetables in place of salad, and soup with salted fish. For dessert, he ate fruit that he had obtained from the forest. "Even bandits eat better than I do." As he ate, Vandaloo realized this and became a little depressed. After having attacked the bandits and taking their food, his dietary situation had improved significantly. He no longer had to eat the hard, smelly meat of raccoons and foxes. However, when he tried to use the cursed tools and undead cookware to cook the food, it had not gone well. The cursed tools that had been made by evil spirits possessing them were monsters that moved on their own, but they had no strength or dexterity. Because of that, they weren't suited for cooking. In that case, it was possible to have Bone Man do it, but the spirits inhabiting him were not that of humans, but of small animals such as insects and mice, so he didn't understand the concept of cooking. When ordered to cut the vegetables, he had swung his sword at the vegetables with full force, cutting straight through the chopping board. The fact that he had learned to use a sword and bow was more than enough development for him. As for Vandaloo himself, "No, to be cooking when you're only 1 year old? What will you do if you burn yourself?" "But, Mom, I think directly eating dried meat and burnt bread is bad for a 1-year-old's digestive system, though I have several times the jaw strength of a regular 1-year-old. "No means no. What will you do if you burn yourself?" "I'll use water and heat leech to cool it down." Since the death attribute was the opposite of the life attribute, he was bad with things like healing. He did have an ability that could heal, but it was a strange one that only worked for healing fatal wounds and serious illnesses, but not injuries that do not endanger one's life. If he burned his whole body, he could heal it, but if he was just burned enough to form a scar on his hand, it would be hard for Vandaloo to heal it with his current abilities. "Then you can't." "All right." This was probably because Darcia had thought, "I have to be careful not to let him get burned while he's still a small child," while she was alive. This notion had probably gone a little wild after her death. But Vandaloo had only just turned 1 year old, and his arms and legs were short. There was definitely the risk of an unexpected injury if he tried to use a pot, so Darcia wasn't wrong to warn him. As a result, Vandaloo was now heating water using embers created by having pieces of firewood rub against each other, and having the undead add broken bread and torn pieces of dried meat into it. This has become his daily meal. The taste was, well, better than raccoon and fox meatballs. It's fine. Once I grow up, I'll earn a lot and hire a skilled chef to make me delicious meals every day. More importantly, today's harvest is... First of all, there were the bandits' weapons. All of the other bandit groups that he had defeated earlier had been using handmade spears by attaching knives to the ends of wooden sticks, and their clubs, bows, and arrows were all of low quality. But this group wasn't called the biggest bandit group just for show. Every one of them had been using good weapons. They were made with normal iron, but they weren't the inferior quality metal made by just pouring molten metal into a cast. No, these had been properly forged by a craftsman, and although some of them had become chipped over time or broken by Bone Man and the others in the fight, some of the bandits had been killed swiftly without time to retaliate, so their weapons were still spotless. The same applied to the leather armor that the bandits had been wearing, compared to the leather armor of the other bandit groups, which had been repaired over and over. These were still in very good condition. They had surely attacked the wagon of a weapons merchant previously. There was also the treasure in the carriages. He had returned all of Rudy's belongings, but there was still a considerable amount left in the three-horse carriage. There was about 50,000 Amid in the money and small amount of accessories, though it was hard to discern their exact value. There was also a small pile of high-quality cloth with a pretty color and 2 barrels of seemingly high-quality wine. In addition, there was also the sugar, which was a valuable ingredient as it was not produced in the country of Murg. And finally, there were the bandits' spare weapons and food. Including the carriage, all of this was likely worth more than 200,000 Amid. It would be about 20 million Japanese yen if converted, and although it was a lot of money, it was not quite enough to be called a fortune. However, looting that much money in this area, where the only town was Evbegia, was quite a feat. Though in this case, instead of praising the bandits for their skills, it might be more appropriate to blame the ineptitude of the guards. With that said, everything other than the food is useless for me. Vandaloo would still have no opportunity to spend the money, and trying his best to make clothes out of the cloth had ended in the rags he was wearing now. As he was unable to fully utilize the treasure the bandits had gathered, his situation had not changed. But Bone Man could use the weapons and armor, and the leather armor could be taken apart to make defensive gear for Bone Monkey and Bone Bear. However, with this amount of treasure, the problem was how to transport it. He had given all of the horses to Rudy, and only the carriage itself remained. Even if he wanted to have his undead pull it, the carriage would have to be altered. Vandaloo had an idea. Now then, who should I get to do it? As Vandaloo murmured and looked around at the spirits around him, there were not only the spirits of the bandits who had just died. To his surprise, the spirit of a thin, middle-aged man, whose appearance from when he was alive was preserved, stepped forward. Please allow me, Sam. In my lifetime, I held the posts of caretaker of horses and coachman for a nobleman. My skills in handling a carriage are second to none. It was fortunate for Vandaloo that the spirit of Sam, who had apparently handled carriages during his lifetime, had not moved on yet. The fact that his spirit had maintained his appearance from while he was alive, without needing mana supplied to him, meant that he had a considerable emotional strength as well. In a way, Sam's spirit was the greatest find out of all of the treasure here. Vandaloo-sama, You have avenged myself and my daughters who were treated as playthings and then killed. In our gratitude, my daughters and I will serve you for the rest of your life." The two spirits standing behind Sam, with their heads bowed, were likely those of Sam's daughters. Their burnt black bodies were barely recognizable as those of women, so Vandaloo could not be certain. The bandits had probably gone too far using them as playthings, and they had become unsellable, or perhaps the bandits had no connections with any slave traders. They were likely killed for one of those two reasons. From the fact that the spirits of the bandits were trembling as Vandaloo looked at them, this was probably correct. "Well, then, I'll leave it to you, Sam." Firmly deciding that he would use the bandits' spirits until they were no more, he sent Sam's spirit into the carriage. "Get up!" As Vandaloo gave this command and poured mana into the carriage, it began to creak. "Go forth!" And with those words, the carriage's wheels began to turn, even without the horse that was normally essential in its function. Seeing this, Vandaloo gave a satisfied nod. "Making a cursed carriage with Sam. Success! With this, I've gained a method of transport as well. Well then, I'll have it run goblins over to level up on the way back to the forest." 2 days later, the highway patrol stepped into the bandits' base after receiving the information from Rudy, but all they saw were piles of dirt where the bandits had been buried, and the beasts and goblins had dug them back up greedily. Tracks made by the wheels of a carriage continued off outside, but they assumed that those were of the bandits that had been victorious in this conflict and didn't bother investigating any further. The commanding officer of the patrol tilted his head when he realized that there were no hoof prints accompanying the carriage's tracks, but it wasn't something worth mentioning in his report. Baronet Bestero had been in a good mood for the past year. After that witch had been caught and executed, only good things had been happening. Yes, the high priest and his men had occupied the forest for the next 2 months, and 3 hunters had gone missing, but those were trivial things. Though the Dampier's corpse had not been discovered, its death had been accepted, and Bestero had received a medal from the King of Murg. With that, the scorn from the feudal lords of the surrounding areas that he was merely the feudal lord of a countryside, with no redeeming features but its wine, had been drowned out. Even this year's wine and the grapes that were used as ingredients for it had turned out well, and the bandits that had caused headaches and threatened the public order had been dealt with near the beginning of summer. He was a little dissatisfied that this wasn't resolved by the highway patrol, protege knights, or even adventurers, but the bandit problem had been a serious one, so he was happy that it was dealt with, even though it had been done through disputes among the bandits themselves. The best thing was that he had been promoted. Though it had not been formally decided, he had received private word that he would soon be summoned to the Amid Empire's imperial capital. The position of baron that his great-grandfather, the first-generation Baronet Bestero, had longed for, that would soon be his. Knowing this, even if the liquid in his glass was not wine but vinegar, he would surely drink it happily. That was how joyful he was now. On a humid summer night, there was a shadow prowling around outside of Begia's outer walls. "Go in, go in, go in!" Vandaloo was followed by countless spirits, and he began to have them possess the outer wall one by one. Even if someone were to see Vandaloo now, they would have no idea what he was doing. Unless one had an aptitude for death attribute magic, or was a necromancer, they wouldn't be able to see the spirits that had not turned into monsters and undead. The guards might have shot arrows at him if they saw him, but their job was to prevent monsters and criminals trying to enter the town from over the outer walls. It was not their job to deal with monsters and criminals that appeared outside the walls at night. Their attention was focused on the gates and the areas surrounding them. The chances of them spotting an infant moving around some distance away from the outer walls without even holding any source of light were incredibly low. It would be possible for adventurers or experienced knights with mana detection skill to notice him. However, though Vandaloo himself was not aware of this, his mana was difficult for others to sense due to his aptitude with the death attribute magic. Therefore, a person with a level 1 or 2 mana detection skill would not be able to sense his magic, even if he were to cast a magic right in front of their eyes. Even with a level 3 or higher skill, it would be impossible without great concentration. But because there were no devil's nests with strong monsters around Evbegia, its Adventurers Guild members were D-class at best, so there were none with a level 3 mana detection skill. After making a half circle around Evbegia's outer wall, Vandaloo exhaled heavily. With this, I'm done. It has taken me 2 days, but the preparations are finished. Now I can achieve my revenge with 1 word. But let's leave it until tomorrow morning. The next day, the morning sun shone upon the people of Evbegia just as it had yesterday, and they were completely oblivious to the fact that today was the day that Evbegia's name would be known not only in all of Murg, but across the entire Amid Empire. Known as the Town of the Mysterious Incident. Collapse. A sound came from the 5-meter-high walls that had protected the town from monsters such as goblins, dangerous wild animals, and bandits. As the guards showed puzzled expressions, the outer wall crumbled with a loud noise. Kaboom! It seemed that the outer wall had collapsed, but one by one, large, human-shaped creatures began to form and let out evil-sounding roars of malice that echoed out into the blue sky. And then, with thundering footsteps, they began to walk away. What? What just happened? Commanding officer, the outer wall has turned into a golem. I can see that. Even as the commanding officer of the guards was shouting, the gate that the guards had been watching became part of another golem and began walking off. Don't just stand there! Stop those golems! But, commanding officer, they're just rampaging around, just walking away. It'd be a different story if they were walking towards the town, but at this rate, even if we don't do anything... The bewildered commanding officer's subordinate did not seem eager to obey his command. But that was to be expected. Who would want to stand before golems made from 5-meter-high stone walls? And how would the guard even fight the stone golems with their iron spears? Looking at it from the guard's point of view, it wasn't surprising that they were questioning the sanity of their commanding officer. You fool! That's the town's outer wall! Without that, what do you plan to protect the town with from now on? However, the guards were taken aback as the commanding officer pointed out this big problem. Without those outer walls, the wild boar, wolves, and bears that came out at night would enter the city, eat the crops and livestock, and attack the people. Goblins and bandits would be able to enter the town as they pleased. Though there were enough guards to watch over the few gates of the town, they definitely lacked the manpower to guard the entire circumference of the town. They had now become aware of this problem, but there was nothing they could do about it. But the guards showed their uneasiness, but no matter how grave the situation was, they simply couldn't increase their manpower. They couldn't do anything but watch the backs of the stone golems that had once been their town's outer wall as they left. The outer walls suddenly turned into golems and walked off. Everybody in Evbegia noticed this, but they couldn't immediately do anything about it. Baronet Bestero froze in terror. The knights and soldiers were in a panic. The Adventurers Guild's personnel were running around in a hurry and shouting to send out an emergency request, and the townspeople were simply dumbfounded. However, that wasn't the end of it. The dirt! The dirt has turned into a golem! That's my vineyard! That's the dirt from my grape vineyard! Wait, my field! My wheat field! Wait! The earth of the fields, along with the crops and trees that were growing in them, turned into golems and followed in the footsteps of the stone golems that had left the town just a little bit earlier. The farmers saw this and desperately chased after them. Even though the golems were just made of dirt, the farmers were quite brave to try and stop the golems that were larger than themselves. But because they were farmers, they simply couldn't allow the golems to leave. Not to try to recover the crops and trees sprouting from the golems' backs, but because the dirt itself that made up the golem's body was the most important to them. The earth was important in agriculture. They had spread fertilizer and plowed the fields to ripen their produce for many years. It was essential to them. If they lost it, they would have to rebuild that earth from scratch. On Earth and Origin, one could get their hands on fertilizer immediately, but in Lambda it would take time. For the farmers who owned vineyards, it was even more serious, as they would have to raise their trees from scratch as well. And not only the fields, but... It's the feudal Lord Sama's house! The house is collapsing from the second floor and becoming a golem? The Adventurers Guild as well. My friends are in there. The feudal lord's house and the Adventurer Guild's building became golems and began walking outside the town as well. The golems' movements were slow, but their bodies were large so that their strides were long. The townspeople, knight and adventurers who wanted to stop the golems, were now on a chase to recover the rubble from their buildings. Vandaloo watched all of this, feeling satisfied. The outer walls, the fields, the Adventurers Guild, and the feudal lord's house. Having all of the various spirits possess these and wait for his signal had been difficult. The outer walls alone had taken 2 days, and the fields and the Adventurers Guild had taken a day each. But once it came to starting it, he only needed to say one word. Like dominoes that had been painstakingly arranged, finally falling down. It was a very satisfying revenge. Look, Mom, those guys who laughed at you are all crying with pathetic looks on their faces now. With its outer walls and structures turning into golems, Evbegia was now in a situation from which it could not recover. Even if they defeated the golems and retrieved the rubble that had once been the buildings, they would still need to do the repairs. Much of the rubble would be unusable. The only thing that could somewhat be gathered up and returned to normal would be the earth from the fields. Evbegia would have to rebuild all of those tall, thick walls. Unless this was done, the town would not function, not in the world of Lambda, in which dangerous monsters roamed. Of course, guards would have to be prepared while the repairs were ongoing, hiring more guards, putting out more requests for adventurers, ordering materials from stonemasons, and arranging for the workers would take a great amount of time and, most importantly, money. So much so that the reconstruction of Baronet Bestero's house would have to wait, no matter how much money he tried to use for bribery. Of course, he would beg for help from Murg's government, and then his position of Baron would disappear. In addition, Vandaloo had even extended his reach into the wine warehouse. He had applied decomposition magic to the barrels of wine in the warehouse and caused it all to spoil. And then he used sterilization to kill every single particle of yeast that was preserving it. Nobody had noticed it yet, but Evbegia's entire industry had been obliterated. it would take literally decades to rebuild it.
Thank you for all that you've done for me, Vandaloo. It was hard, wasn't it, to do this kind of gentle revenge?
Darcia's spirit looked lovingly at her son, who possessed a vast amount of mana. There would be many who would demand what was gentle about this revenge, but considering Vandaloo's magic and mana pool, it could be called gentle, just as Darcia had said. If he had the golems that he had made from the outer walls go into the town rather than outside, he could have caused large amounts of damage to the town, and many would have died, including the golems made from the feudal lord's house and the Adventurers Guild building. Catastrophic harm could have been caused. Because High Priest Gordon and the Five Colored Blades, led by Hines, had left this town long ago. He could have used deadly poison to contaminate the well water, or simply used disease to start an epidemic. If he wanted to, he could have killed every single person in Evbegia. Darcia had thought it kind of him to not do this, and he even had waited until morning before causing the outer walls to crumble.
I just did to them what they did to me.
Vandaloo didn't confirm or deny Darcia's words, but he hadn't intended to show compassion for the townspeople. In his mind, there was not a single guiltless person in Evbegia. Every single one of them were criminals who had watched Darcia's execution and laughed as if it were some kind of show. That was why he had done the same to them.
From now on, I'm going to spend years, decades to get you back, Mom. I'm going to make a new body that will match your spirit. I've made it so that these people have to work for decades to return to their original lifestyle. That's all.
There wouldn't be a single casualty directly caused by this event. He had even thought about the order in which the golems began to move, with the outer walls first and then the buildings, so that they would not collapse partway through. He had only destroyed things that could be repaired.
You're right. You gave them a chance. Vandaloo is a gentle child, after all.
If one thought of it one way, he had inflicted damage that would take decades to repair, but Darcia, who had been charmed by the death attribute charm skill, had no intention of pointing that out. As Darcia patted his head with her hand that he could not feel, his eyes narrowed a little.
Well then, let's get going. Bonebird, I'm counting on you.
Letting out a cry that sounded like a person being strangled, Bonebird, who had become a phantom bird, spread its bone wings. Putting away the fragment of Darcia's bone near his chest, he took a hold of both of Bonebird's legs. The bone wings, covered in shining blue-white spirit feathers, began to flap, and Vandaloo flew through the air to return to the cursed carriage where Bone Man and the others were waiting.